It was quite a long time ago, Alison. I became a single parent father with 3 children. I was lucky enough to actually get custody of my children. And I thought, people were phoning me. This is going around into the early 1990s. People were phoning me, getting in touch with me and saying, well, how did you manage to keep your children, in custody? Because it's only 1 in 10. So I was trying to give them advice how to do it. And then a few years later, I was a socialist and a gender equality person. I was a feminist. I thought equal rights, equal opportunities for everyone. So I thought, well, I've got 2 bachelor's degrees. I thought what I would do would take a master's degree in gender and social policy at master's level. But when I took it, the year before I took it, it was called Feminism and Social Policy. But the funding, they couldn't get funding, the university couldn't get funding because they called it Feminism and Social Policy. So they changed the name to Gender and Social Policy, got the funding, but the content was exactly the same. So I went into the course, the 18-month course, expecting to be just to be accepted as a socialist and an equality feminist. And I was told by Dr. Bird, who was running the course, she didn't actually do the lecturing and teaching, but she actually said, Swayne, you're going to meet some really disturbed women on this course. So by hell, I seriously did. I didn't really expect what I was going to meet. And I was the only man on the course. There were about 44, 45 women on the course of all ages, not just postgraduates, all ages. And apparently I was the only male in Britain at that time taking a feminist course. And of course, the women in there tended to forget, because I was the only male, tended to forget that I was around. So it was like a fly on the wall, and they were, during coffee breaks and lunch breaks, they were actually talking about things and saying things. Isn't it awful that men keep asking women out for dates? And I'm thinking, no, it's perfectly natural to do that. And they would say, well, when we graduate, what we're going to do, I'm going to go into the media and put on feminist courses. And others said, well, I'm going to go into teaching. And others said, well, I'm going to go into local politics and set up become an equality officer. And they were planning in the mid-1990s how they were going to infiltrate and enter into positions of influence and power so they could influence agendas. Now, this is exactly what's happened after 20 years. Because of the definition of power is, if you use the university first year political philosophy definition of power, is a group has power in society if it can put its own agendas, its own issues on agendas, if it can keep opposing groups' issues off agendas, and if it can, by manipulating agendas, if it can actually benefit from that. And this is exactly what's happened now. What we have feminism, ideological feminism, is keeping men's issues, men and boys' issues, off agendas because of its power in the media and in universities and in the political system, and putting its own issues on agendas. And this is why we see such an imbalance in a political and public education of feminist issues and gender issues. We never for example, in the BBC in England, we hardly ever, we never see, in actual fact, men's issues being addressed. But we'll regularly see feminist issues being addressed. It's really, really important. Also, we'll never see in any area of the media, the newsprint, radio or television, we'll never see feminism actually criticised, because these people are in positions of power. And anything that might critique or challenge feminism at all will be kept off the agenda. So we never see, and feminism is the only 20th century ideology that has never been questioned and challenged. Fascism has, Nazism, communism, Marxism, all been challenged. What gives feminism that special protection, why it's never been challenged? What gives it that special protection is feminists themselves in position of influence and power to manipulate agendas. Sorted. Well, yeah, I went in quite naive into this master's degree, thinking that everybody wanted gender equality. I'm still an equality feminist, incidentally, but when I came to realise what these people were like, it was an ideological movement, the ideology of the patriarchy I learnt later. I thought, oh, this is not right, you know. So I started really studying feminism in depth, and this is where I started to look at. 10 years later, I started to I'd read so much. I wanted to write a book on this, which came out a few years ago. Why Britain Hates Men: Exposing Feminism. And I had enough material for 4 books, but so far I've only written the one. And I really studied feminism and gender politics in depth, and I've been doing this now for 25 years. It's really interesting, and why we haven't got as far as we ought to have got in 25 years. We have to change tack. Sure, well, there's very few people who have been around for 25, 30 years in working with the MRA, men's rights activism and men's rights movement, and to a certain extent, but not a great extent so far, anti-feminism. And we have new people coming in every few years and saying, well, this would be a really good idea, let's try this, or that would be a really good idea. And we were thinking, well, we tried this 5 years ago and it didn't work, or we tried this idea. But they're so enthusiastic, it's difficult to kind of stamp on that enthusiasm by saying, well, it's been done, we've got to try something different, because over the last 25 years, feminism has got so much more power, and men and boys' problems, issues and rights have been lost so much further that in another 20, 25 years, it's going to be like off the planet. So we have to change tack and do something different. Now, my idea is to come straight out and challenge feminism, totally challenge the feminist ideology. Not women. The thing with feminists is if they could get every ordinary men and women to believe that questioning feminism is questioning women, then they've got a winning formula, and that's what they do. They convince everybody that questioning and challenging feminism is questioning and challenging women and is anti-women. And that's why we have women's Minister for Women, we have a women's unit, we have a women's committee. It's not women's unit, women's committee, women's officer, it's feminist officer, feminist unit, feminist committee. And this, we need to change tack totally now after 25 years, because we've got nowhere. The whole thing's got so much worse. We need to change tack and actually go for the patriarchal ideology that is feminism. Well, it was after about 6 months of the 18 months course. I had to write essays 2 or 3 times. Once from the way I saw it, being a single parent father with 3 children and being an equality feminist, I would write from that perspective. But that wasn't good enough for the lecturers in there who are ideological feminists. They wanted men to be the patriarchy, as you know, according to feminists, it's not men in power. The essence of patriarchy, if you use feminism's own definitions, is patriarchy is a society established by men for the benefit of men to the disadvantage of women. So that's the way I had to write my essays and present my seminars, etc. So when I was forced to do that, if I didn't do it with that perspective, I was marked down. So I thought, well, this can't be right. This is just absolutely academically ridiculous. And it was then that I started thinking, no, somebody has to oppose these people. And there were very few people doing it at that time. But 10 years later, I actually joined an active movement called Fathers for Justice. You might have heard of them. They dressed up as Batman and Robin and Batman. Well, I didn't do that in the uniforms because I had long hair and more of it then. And I was in Equity, that's the actors' unions, and so I thought I'd go as Merlin. And I put a big purple cloak on, which was quite interesting because you're going up the ladders, you know, trying to be macho, and you're holding the cloak up, going like that. It's like what? But once you're on the roof, you know, it can be as macho as you like. So I joined these people, and it was really, really interesting. I didn't have to because I got custody of my children, you know. But it's such an injustice. These guys, we had meetings once a fortnight in Bristol. We were the most active group, in actual fact, not the London. There was about 10 different groups. We were the most active. We were always doing marches, always on people's roofs. It was really, really interesting. And the guys used to come along, and it was sad because when we met their new wives and new girlfriends, they used to say they cry themselves to sleep at night because they're not allowed to see their children. I could make you weep with some of the stories that came out of that. But they used to, once a fortnight, they got together, and it was so therapeutic. And it was absolutely wonderful to see the guys, because they could get everything off the chest. They were talking to people who had been through the system themselves, and they could relax with that type of person. And it was really, really good. So we did all these demonstrations, and I used to go up on the roof, even though I have that fear of heights, that Viagra. That, you got that? Yeah. Vertigo, Viagra, play on words. Yeah. When I'm speaking to sixth formers on that, I use that word, and usually there's a total blank, and I have to explain to them. Say, come on, give me a break. 2 words mixed together: Viagra, vertigo. Yeah. And so they chuckle about 5 minutes later. But there we go. So yeah, it was good. It was really good fun, and we went on demonstrations. I remember one Christmas there was 300 of us dressed as Father Christmases. I didn't have to do much dressing up, as you could tell. Well, then but we had the uniforms on, and we were marching through London. It was a 3.5-hour march with 300 people dressed as Father Christmas. There was grandparents as well as guys who had lost their children, and I separated from the Bristol group and attached myself to this elderly couple and the woman was crying all the time, and she was in tears like for 3 hours. And I said, well, why are you crying? What's the problem? She said, I've not been able to see my grandchildren. She said, for 5 years, and they're 8 and 6, and we're not even allowed to give them Christmas presents. But what we do every Christmas, we've got a little room in our bungalow, and we put the Christmas presents in there every year. She said, and we just hope that when they're 16 and they want to see us, they'll know that we haven't forgotten them. And when I say this to my audience of 18, 19-year-old children, it does choke me. But I could tell you a lot of stories. I could tell you some stories that would make you laugh, as well as make you cry. Well, it split. There were it was in schisms. Every group, like the Labour Party in Britain, they had schisms. They split. People want to do different things, and people want to be leaders. They want to be the leaders of this, leaders of that, or it's not going in the right direction. And it split into about 3 different groups. Real Fathers for Justice, grandson of Fathers for Justice, son of Fathers for Justice, all kinds of stuff like that. And really, it kind of disappeared. It still exists there in its original form, but they don't do much activism now. I do talks in universities, debates, and in public schools to sixth formers, and any venues I can find an audience. It's absolutely great. I really adore it. Well, yeah, when it first started, because it is such an emotive issue, the public were really involved with it and very, very sympathetic. When we were on the roofs or we were down, people had a table selling wristbands for Fathers for Justice, etc. We had, and this is quite ironic, more women than men who were supportive, putting money in our bucket so we could buy longer ladders, so to speak, to go on Buckingham Palace, and that was quite interesting. But after a while, it coincided with the 9/11, with the terrorism, and if it would have been 10 years earlier, it would have been fantastic. But we had a lot of anti-terrorist police and MI5 people doing naughty things like breaking our doors in, taking the computers, etc., because they viewed us, they said they viewed us as kind of mini terrorists, and so it really went out of fashion, and it lost public support because of that. Yeah, but I do think now activism and getting out there, and these guys, there's a certain group of guys who speak at Speaker's Corner in London every 2 weeks, and they're taking the message of anti-feminism and men's rights to the public, and how they actually do it I really don't know, but they get on the soapbox there and they give it some welly. Now I can't do that, I need an audience and some kind of structure, and then I'm away. And I love the feedback from the audience. It's kind of circular. They enjoy my energy, and I get the energy. They re-energize me, give me traction on stage. So I think there's room for everything. But I run a group called Mandate and chair a group called Mandate, and we meet every 3 months. And we have a national conference in September in the West Country. And what I'm going to look for there is aims, because I think aims are very important. Everybody's flapping around wanting to do this and not wanting to do that. And I think if an individual has a particular, what do you want to see in 10, 20 years' time for an individual? You ask him, what's your method and strategy for getting to that? And then you ask a group that he might be a member of, what's a group aim? And that might be different to the personal guys. And then the whole men's movement, what is your aim? What is your goal eventually? What do you want to do? And it's only when you actually pin down your aims and your goals that you can work out your methods and strategy to actually achieve those. So yeah, street activism is one of them. Agitprop is another one. Get in there, as Antonio Gramsci said, position yourself. Get into positions. He was a Marxist and put in prison by Mussolini for his Marxist views. And this was in the 1920s, whilst he was in prison, he wrote what became known as his prison notes. And he said, you don't have to have lots of groups clashing to change, to get your ideology over. He said, like the French Revolution or the Russian Revolution, what you need to do is change the cultural hegemony. And you do that. It's a slower process, but what you do, you get your people into positions of influence in the schools, in the universities, in the media, in the political system, in political parties, in the trade unions. Get them. It's going to be a longer process, but then you change people's minds, people's world's view, and it's much more powerful because you're not having an ideology imposed upon you. You've thought of it yourself. You don't realise you've been conditioned, and your cultural hegemony, your political and cultural zeitgeist, your mindset has been changed, and you don't really know how or why. And this is exactly what feminism has done since the 1970s, 1980s. When we all now think feminism is righteous and wonderful. People don't know it's such a toxic ideology because young children are taught in schools from junior schools, 5 to 8 years of age, in secondary schools, in universities. We're told in the media, it's always pro-feminist. They call it women's issues, of course it's not, it's feminist issues. And we're told everywhere that feminism is so wonderful, and it's never ever questioned and never ever challenged. So everybody thinks it's wonderful. But as I said previously, it's the only 20th century ideology that has never been questioned and challenged. There has to be something suspicious about an ideology that won't allow itself to be publicly scrutinised. No, I don't, and that is an interesting point actually, Alison, because I don't have anything online. So I have a spatial disability, right, which means that if I drive somewhere I've never been before, I get lost, seriously, and I can't do the internet as I should be able to. One of the things I used to teach was special needs, and now this is set on me about 10 years ago. I can't actually do it the right things to get on the internet, so I have to have friends to help me do it. The only thing I can do is email, and it's really quite embarrassing. So when I wrote the book, I had to do it really longhand. I couldn't access stuff on the internet. I had to go to libraries, write to America for some of your books. I must have read 80 to 100 feminist books, some books that men are not supposed to read. It gives the strategy from feminists saying we're going to go into schools. You know, I'm thinking, wow, if guys could read this, they'd actually know that entryism is what feminism did. They took Gramsci's idea of positioning to the nth degree, and they were so successful with it. So it was like really, really difficult. I mean, I remember one time that I just finished 3 weeks work on childcare and feminism, because I've got enough information and research for another 3 books. I just finished 3 weeks work on feminism and childcare, and I live in Bath. My mother and father live in Cheshire. My mother phoned me and said, Dad's a bit poorly, can you come up? So I said, yeah, okay. So I had to drive up 3.5 hours, 4 hours the way I drive, very slow. Press the button to save, press the wrong button, and everything disappeared. like after 3 weeks. And this is the kind of thing, it's like 3 steps forward, 2 steps back. And it took me ages to write the book, but Why Britain Hates Men, Exposing Feminism. But it was well worth it in the end, because apparently people are reading it, and it was written like a car manual. You know, you want to know how to do this bit on your car, and you want to know how to approach feminism from this angle. It's got bits of everything in there, so it's not a boring book at all. It's got philosophy in there. What's the difference between equality feminism and equality of outcome feminism? It's got, if you want to know about why feminism exaggerates rape or domestic violence and how it does it, then you go to that particular section. That's absolutely right. I mean, a friend Rod keeps saying that in Britain, the younger ones that are coming in, and they're coming in now, in dribs and drabs, but they are coming in and taking it on board, really need to learn from people who have done all this stuff in the past. And I think this is what I said earlier about reinventing the wheel. They're saying, oh, well, why don't we do this and why don't we do that? And some of the older guys in F4J and other organisations are saying, well, we did try that. About 20 years ago, and it didn't quite work. So it's kind of going around in circles. However, having said that, what with the internet now, it's a brand new tool, and what was tried in the past and failed might actually work now with the new kind of tools that you young people have got to fight feminism. So instead of perhaps reinventing the wheel, if we tried some things we tried in the past and didn't succeed, now they may succeed. So I think we ought to be open to any strategy at all that we come across and see what works. But just being an MRA and the men's movement without critiquing feminism and challenging feminism, we've tried that for 25 years. We've got to change totally now. We've got to go for the feminist ideology, the ideology of the patriarchy, good women, bad men. We can't do with that any longer. It's not fair to our children and to our sons and to our grandsons. We have a responsibility.